I can't think of a single time that the zombies community was more excited for something than when Treyarch revealed Blood of the Dead at the Black Ops 4 reveal event. There was nothing but absolute electricity in the air, and I know because I was in attendance for this. I saw this happen, and I participated in being excited for this remastered map of one of the greatest zombie maps to ever exist. And I think it's fair to say that a lot of people were disappointed initially in Zombies Chronicles, as it did not contain a remaster of Mob of the Dead, which seemed a little bit strange because even in the final Black Ops 3 map, Revelations, there is an entire section dedicated to Mob of the Dead. So it seems a bit weird that they would develop this yet not include it in perhaps the greatest Zombies DLC to ever exist. But they had much bigger plans for it, obviously. But Blood of the Dead is one of the most controversial maps. Not to imply that Mob of the Dead is a perfect zombies map, because it's certainly not, but you'd be hard-pressed to find somebody who legitimately just doesn't like Mob of the Dead versus somebody who is critical of Blood of the Dead. But why exactly is Blood of the Dead so controversial? What makes it a map that a lot of people consider to be a genuinely bad map, or one at least worth criticizing? Is it a misunderstood masterpiece, or is it simply a miss from Treyarch? Well, we're going to analyze both Mob of the Dead and its design philosophies, and we're going to compare and contrast how that relates to Blood of the Dead, because it also depends to some degree on your lens, on how you view this. If you're looking at Blood of the Dead and how it holds up simply as a Mob of the Dead remaster, then I think it kind of fails. But Blood of the Dead does a lot of its own things that I believe kind of generate a brand new experience that is certainly worth talking about.
We move on to stage 2. Let's get moving.
Here you go, fellas. Courtesy of the Warden's private collection.
Boys in the laundry stashed the parts?
Of course they fucking did.
What the fuck? I killed him.
You've been in the joint too long, Al. You've forgotten how to get shit done.
So before we can take apart their design, it's really important to understand the story context of both of these maps, because that inherently does influence how the map is designed from a core standpoint. So Mob of the Dead is in its own little pocket dimension, but in the context of Black Ops 2, this was a map that was entirely separate to the rest of the story that was being told at that point, and was something entirely novel. Not only that, but this would be the very first map in BO2 that Jason Blundell would be spearheading and taking his own approach to design, and you can tell that it plays very differently to every other Black Ops 2 map that came prior. While maps like Transit and Die Rise gave you just a whole bunch of tools to essentially play with however you want and survive in this open sandbox as long as possible, Jason Blundell maps, by contrast, were significantly more focused. They kept you on the rails a little bit, and they gave you a tangible goal to go after from the very start of the game. The thing is, with early Jason Blundell maps, particularly Mob of the Dead, Origins, and Shadows of Evil, you have a goal, right? And that is to typically unlock most of the map and maybe activate a few different locations. In Mob of the Dead, it's gathering the plane parts. In Origins, it's turning on the generators. And in Shadows of Evil, it's doing all the rituals. But you don't have to do these in any particular order. And more so than that, they don't overtune how you go about completing these either. I mean, that's why maps like Mob Mob and Origins and Shadows still to this day are continually having their world records broken because people are finding very creative ways to optimize this process, meaning it's very open-ended, yet it is still structured, and that's not something we really see in modern zombies anymore. The point is, Mob of the Dead was the first zombies map at that point to have this structure without structure, and this was a very different challenge for the zombies community at the time. However, I think it was an experiment that would significantly pay off in the future, and it makes Mob of the Dead play a very deliberate kind of way. Even from just spawning into the map right away, from the very opening second, you have this paper on the wall that tells you to gather these parts and build a plane and escape. From frame one, you have a goal of what you need to do, which at that point was very different to any zombies map where you just kind of load in and survive and just try to get better guns and live as long as you can. This was a very different approach, and also, not to mention, Mob of the Dead has a very unique system called Afterlife. Now, this is a system entirely unique to Mob of the Dead. You will not find this on any other zombies map, and I've been thinking about this a lot. Treyarch used to make systems to fit maps. Now they make maps to fit systems they've already made in modern Call of Duty Zombies. It's a very different approach there. In Mob of the Dead, you have this system called Afterlife, and from the very get-go, you spawn in as this ghost, and you can go and revive yourself. But before you do that, they give you a little tiny tutorial right away where you can see that it opens this wall that you can't otherwise see unless you're in this mode, and it can give you rewards. So if you turn this on, you can get a little double points in the spawn room, which is a neat little trick for obviously what you have to do to set up the rest of the map as you go on. And once again, while we're on the topic of the Afterlife mechanic, this is something that is not overtuned. As you play the map and go and unlock and progress, you can use the Afterlife in insanely creative ways to ultimately get to the same goal, but you can do it however you want, meaning the story of Mob of the Dead, as in the first couple of rounds you play, are almost never the same. You can play this a million different ways, and it will be a different experience every single time you set up, which is not something we have in modern COD Zombies, where you gather points, you buy the same doors, then you get to pack-a-punch the exact same route. That's pretty much it. Now, in relation to the Afterlife mechanic and how it relates to Mob of the Dead, this map would make an absolutely monumental change for the Call of Duty Zombies formula that's been established up to this point. They would remove Quick Revive. There is no Quick Revive perk at all on Mob of the Dead. Traditionally in COD Zombies, the Quick Revive machine was always found in the starting room, and starting in Black Ops 1, that was pretty much the first thing that you bought because it would allow you to revive yourself in case you went down. However, in Mob of the Dead, Afterlife is the replacement for Quick Revive, and more so than that, if you're playing solo, you actually get a total of 3, and you get 1 replaced every single round. Now, Afterlife is also used for opening doors and progressing through the map, and that does actually come at the cost of being able to take it down, so there's also some risk reward there. And this did a few things. First of all, adding some brand new risk reward to the gameplay we hadn't seen, but also it was a totally new mechanic that we have never contended with before and is still being optimized even to this day. So it's this very open-ended thing to learn, but also you have 3 in solo because Mob of the Dead can be a very tough and unforgiving map to set up on. I remember distinctly at the time that people were saying Mob of the Dead was the hardest zombies map to date, and I can certainly see why that would be the sentiment, because Mob of the Dead has a very weird power climb structure where it's really hard at first, especially if you're just learning the map, but you get to a certain point progression-wise, and if you do a couple of, extra things and side Easter eggs to unlock some stuff, it becomes one of the easiest maps in the game. So it has a very rewarding path, but it does start out very oppressive. We'll get to it in more detail, but I want to quickly compare the early game of Mob of the Dead a bit with Blood of the Dead, because while in Mob you have this immediate goal literally the second you spawn in, and you kind of have this mini tutorial for how this brand new system works, Blood of the Dead, on the other hand, doesn't really have that. You spawn in Richthofen's lab, but that doesn't really give you an immediate gameplay goal, and also there is no afterlife on that map at all. Now, there are some other things that Blood of the Dead does that I just absolutely absolutely love, but this early game setup and the immediate spawning in experience, especially directly compared with Mob of the Dead, just doesn't even really hold a candle. Mob of the Dead teaches you these brand new mechanics in a matter of minutes and gives you this goal right away, whereas Blood of the Dead kind of innately assumes that you're already familiar with what's going on, not only in the grander Ether story, but kind of just Black Ops 4 as a game. And they say first impressions are everything, and Mob of the Dead makes a very strong first impression, whereas Blood of the Dead, not so much. The goal of Mob of the Dead is to make you uncomfortable very quickly, that you feel you have no other choice but to branch out and explore, and inevitably you're going to find one of these dog heads on the wall, and you'll probably kill a zombie near that area, and notice that it will pop out and start eating zombies. After killing 6 of them, it will go away and give you this activation noise, meaning that you should probably go and find more. Blood of the Dead does the same thing as well, but it's kind of just assuming you already know what this is from Mob of the Dead first and foremost. So now, not only do you have this goal of trying to find all of these plane parts that the spawn room showed you, but now you found this dog head and you're encouraged to go and find more. And the other thing that I really like about Mob of the Dead structure is how it handles perks, because perk locations in older zombie games were very deliberate and well thought out. The thing with Juggernog in Mob of the Dead, and I didn't really quite appreciate this until maybe the last year or so of playing this map, is that Juggernog is placed in a way that you physically cannot acquire it until going to the outermost area of the map, or what you might consider is one of the most dangerous areas to explore. In older zombie games, Juggernog would almost always be placed in a position that required you to explore a lot of the map to acquire, or at the very least, required you to give up an advantageous camping spot. One of the best examples is on Town. You can hold down the staircase to where there's only one entrance, and if you have 4 people with good guns, it'd theoretically be a pretty good camping spot, but you can't get Jug without giving up that door. And I think this works, and more so might fundamentally be the core problem of the Black Ops 4 perk system, because again, traditionally, perks were placed in a location that were very thought out and deliberate, and that required you to explore the map, required you to give something up, or something like that. Where in BO4, because of the homogenization of the perk system, and more so the gameplay systems at large, you can place perks wherever you want, meaning that deliberate choice of where and when you should be getting perks, and having this kind of like carrot on a stick to motivate you to go out and explore the map just doesn't really exist anymore, or it's at least not the same at all. And that can make the perk system in BO4 feel very awkward. But my point with all of this is, Mob of the Dead places the perks in very specific locations that are, I would say, perfectly balanced to the risk reward that's associated with this map. And also, we don't get all the perks we want on this map. There's a lot that don't exist here. There would be a brand new perk called Electric Cherry that got added that shocks around you when you reload, and the emptier your magazine is, the more powerful the shock. It's pretty cool, and it's a play on words of an electric chair, which again is thematically appropriate for Mob of the Dead. What we don't get is stuff like Stamina, which would theoretically be an amazing perk on this map, but it's nowhere to be found here. Nor do we have anything like Mule Kick or even PhD Flopper. You could look at this as a downside of Mob of the Dead, and potentially fair enough, but I also think that those choices were made specifically to give this map a particular feel, where in Blood of the Dead, because again, you can run any perk on the map and in any order as well, there isn't that deliberate feel associated with that map either, which isn't a massive deal for some people, but for me, it's one of those small things that I pay attention to. In order to do almost anything in Mob of the Dead, to activate essentially any mechanic requires the use of Afterlife to open certain doors, accessing plane parts, turning on perks, etc. And that is how you, number one, get comfortable with this brand new mechanic, but also, again, you can utilize it in extremely creative ways, and it is not overtuned in the slightest, giving you a lot of freedom with how you approach this mechanic. The Afterlife system is not only a replacement for Quick Revive, it's also a replacement for the power switch, which traditionally was kind of that carrot on a stick that encouraged you to explore the map in zombies, get the power on, and then you can start interacting with things like perks and the other features and traps and whatnot. But in Mob of the Dead, that's all tied to Afterlife, and you do it in a little bit more of like a different sequential order than just flipping on a power switch. Blood of the Dead would weirdly just revert back to the old power switch system. When you spawn in kind of this brand new section they developed, the new industries, you have one power switch over here that you flip on to turn power in this section, but obviously that doesn't power the main building. And in order to activate the rest of the power in the main prison building, you have to go all the way down in the engine room near the docks, and in Blood of the Dead, you'll walk into this room that was previously only accessible in Mob through Afterlife, but you can just walk in here this time, and the power switch is right there, but it's seemingly random, like for no reason. There's 3 power switches on the wall, and one of them will have the switch you need to flip, and that's it. It's like, I don't know what this adds. I don't know why this couldn't have just been one power switch. I don't know, you could say it's like ambient and it's dark, whatever, but you could still make it dark and still have a power switch. I don't know why they need to randomize it when the locations are just sitting right there. But my point is, I think for this map specifically, Mob of the Dead was right to get rid of the traditional power switch. I think it serves this map better to kind of power and unlock the map in chunks as you get more plane parts. You get this mini reward for every section you explore, and once you've explored the entire map and interacted with all of the mandatory Afterlife locations, you should have all of the plane parts, and then by this point, you can go to the rooftop and build it, just like the paper said. And this is the big payoff you were waiting for. You built the plane, you get on, this music starts rolling, and you know something's about to happen. You take off, and you take to the skies, and eventually, after a couple of seconds of feeling like you may have actually escaped, you crash into the Golden Gate Bridge and are stuck here once again. But in front of you is the Pack-a-Punch machine, a massive payoff for all of your hard work. The victory is somewhat short-lived because after a few moments, zombies will continue to spawn back in, and the warden will spawn in to come after you as well. However, this time you're more prepared because you have a fully brand new Pack-a-Punched weapon to deal with him. So you get massively rewarded for all of the work that you put in, and setting up on Mob of the Dead can be a little bit of a chore. After either being intrigued by the chairs that just spawned in or being overwhelmed by zombies and the warden, you can jump onto these chairs that will send you directly back to the spawn room in Afterlife, exactly where you started once again, but this time when you revive yourself, you have all of the weapons that you came with on the bridge, and so you've got a lot better weaponry to deal with the zombies back at the main prison this time. And this will continue for as long as you want it. At this point, you have Pack-a-Punch, and you continually can go back after every round and build the plane once again and repeat the cycle, which is kind of what it's encouraging you to do, because this will subtly lead you into maybe starting the Easter egg. I want to talk about Mob of the Dead's Easter egg, its side quest, and even its wonder weapon, because they are all very interesting on this map. The thing is, as much as I love Mob of the Dead, I do kind of think that all of the design choices and also the attention to detail in how Mob of the Dead plays was mostly focused on the spawn to the initial setup and getting to Pack-a-Punch. That seems like the main point of the gameplay loop in Mob of the Dead, where its main Easter egg is very thin, let's say. Like, there's not a whole lot of substance or steps to it as far as gameplay goes. And I would argue that Blood of the Dead would do the exact opposite. It focuses significantly more heavily on its main Easter egg, its quest, and those kind of steps, whereas the gameplay loop of the initial setup of Blood of the Dead, as in getting the power on, you know, getting the shield built, and kind of getting to Pack-a-Punch, that stuff is a lot more streamlined and thin, and there's not as much going on there as there is in Mob of the Dead. But again, its Easter egg is where it's really loaded. They are exact opposites in a sense. One is light on the initial setup and heavy on the Easter egg, and one is heavy on the initial setup and very light on the Easter egg. But back to Mob of the Dead. When you initially find that first dog on the wall and you feed him successfully, that not only encourages you to explore the map more, but once you find all 3, you'll eventually connect the dots and see that those 3 dog heads on the wall, kind of like in the Citadel, are actually a hint of to come back here once you've filled all 3, and you'll be rewarded with the Hell's Retriever. This is a retrievable tomahawk that will come back to you every couple of seconds that will kill zombies. And this was an amazing way to take advantage of the criminally underutilized tactical slot in COD Zombies, because up to this point, what did we really have as far as tacticals go? Monkey bombs, maybe, and EMP grenades, which were downright useless and virtually have no use in the Zombies gameplay loop. However, the Tomahawk would change that, and it would become an immediate fan favorite. Now, I wouldn't really consider getting the Hell's Retriever an Easter egg exactly, but I would consider upgrading it an Easter egg. A very obscure and somewhat difficult to understand upgrade process would be how to get the Hell's Redeemer. This was something that the community eventually discovered, and it was a slightly more powerful version of the original Hell's Retriever Tomahawk. It would become blue this time, it'd be a bit stronger into higher rounds, and the way to get it was, a little bit tricky at points. You needed to get a certain number of kills in the prison, go to the bridge, kill a whole round with just your tomahawk, go back, you throw it in this fire pits, and then you pick it up around later, and bam, it's upgraded. But it would be permanently upgraded, and it was a wonderful addition and something that you could go a little bit out of your way for to acquire an item that you otherwise had no way of getting. And this is somewhere where Blood of the Dead actually kind of holds true to its original design. You get the Hell's Retriever in Blood by filling up the 3 dogs, albeit the dog heads are in slightly different locations now. The only one that's the same is the one in the initial upper spawn room, and the other 2 are out by the warden's house or in the new industry section. But at the end of the day, it's still the same process to acquire the weapon, and it even behaves the same way. And not to mention, it has a very different redeeming process, or to upgrade it to the Hell's Redeemer. In Mob of the Dead, I like the quest, but it can be a little bit finicky sometimes and somewhat hard to replicate at points, whereas I actually really like the upgrade quest for the Redeemer in Blood of the Dead. I think it's one of the best side quests that map has to offer, and the Redeemer is incredibly enjoyable to use in that map. I mean, there are other side quests in Blood of the Dead that are genuinely downright horrific, which we'll talk about, but in Mob of the Dead, there are a handful of subtle but really meaningful side Easter eggs, the Redeemer being just one of them. The other thing you can do is acquire a golden spork, which sometimes goes hand in hand with the main Easter egg, but isn't necessarily required. To acquire this, all you need to do is ride the plane once, and then when you come back to the prison, you can use your Hell's Retriever Tomahawk on this special poster, revealing this hidden afterlife symbol. You can go into afterlife, and then you can go in this closet, and then you find a spork hidden at the bottom of this floor. If you shock it, it will go to the cafeteria. And then from the cafeteria, you can throw a tomahawk to send it up to the infirmary, and then it goes into this bathtub. And then from here, you can kill zombies in the shower section with the wonder weapon, and after about 30 to 50 kills or so, you can come back, and this spoon will become a golden spork that will one-knife zombies until round 34, an incredibly powerful weapon that you have no other way of acquiring unless you do this specific step. When it comes to side Easter eggs, I really like the idea of doing a quest that gives you a reward that you cannot acquire anywhere else in-game. As much as I love Modern Zombies and a lot of the side quests that they've done in stuff like Cold War and Black Ops 6, one of the problems with those, as far as I'm concerned, is that they give you things that you're already going to acquire in the game at some point. Maybe you get a free perk, or you get salvage, or something like that. One of the rare few exceptions is getting golden armor on the tomb. That's the only way you can actually get that as a mechanic, and it's a very awesome side Easter egg for it. And Mob of the Dead, and even Blood of the Dead for that matter, are absolutely loaded to the brim when it comes to quests like this. Mob of the Dead would also begin to experiment with new forms of wonder weaponry. Traditionally, up to this point, most zombie maps would have 1 or 2 wonder weapons associated with that map. You would traditionally have the ray gun and a map-specific weapon like the VR-11 in Call of the Dead, or the baby gun on Shangri-La, or the wave gun on Moon, something like that. It was typically just that weapon though, and that was that, right? You get it out of the box and it just functions as is. Mob of the Dead would be a little bit different, as number one, you would have a few ways to acquire the wonder weapon. There would actually be a quest to get it, as well as being able to obtain it from the box. The Blundergat is a cross between a blunderbuss and a Gatling gun, and this would be the star of the show for the map. The Blundergat is absolutely one of the most iconic pieces to this experience, and you could acquire it either from getting lucky out of the mystery box, or getting it directly from collecting a couple of different hidden skulls with your Hell's Retriever around the map. This was very interesting because typically in most zombie maps prior to this, there wasn't exactly always a guaranteed way to get the wonder weapon. You would just have to get lucky from the mystery box, but Mob of the Dead gave you a direct quest to getting to that powerful weapon. And not only that, you could have the Blundergat in its base form, you could pack-a-punch it to make a more powerful shotgun, or you could craft this item called the acid gat conversion kit to create the acid gat or the vitrolic withering when it's pack-a-punched. What I also really like about this wonder weapon is its versatility, right? You can use it as the blundergat or the pack-a-punched form of it, and it's probably better for just a run-and-gun kind of playstyle, and the shotgun is unbelievably powerful. But if you use the conversion kit to change to the acid gat, it becomes a totally different function where these acid capsules actually distract zombies for a couple of moments, so it can act like a little bit of a monkey bomb effect to get you out of situations, to hoard more effectively, and to kill zombies in a safe way. The acid gat upgrade is generally considered to be the best option, but the game did not outright make you craft this item and force you to use the wonder weapon in order to interact with most aspects of the game. Sure, you do need the acid gat in order to obtain the golden spork, but that's a small Easter egg on its own that most people, to experience the fun parts of this map, don't necessarily have to do. You can still get to pack-a-punch and survive high rounds just fine without doing any of this, but it is an additional bonus just in case you want to. Mob of the Dead would also feature a couple of really small, charming side Easter eggs that are not at all integral to experiencing the map, but add a little something if you go out of your way to do these. One of these is actually associated with this number panel at the bottom of the Citadel that you need for a variety of Easter egg steps, including some main Easter egg stuff. But if you go up to this panel and type in 115, which is, traditionally the element that's used in zombies and is also responsible for kind of controlling them, if you type in 115, you get a mysterious voice that says "not this time," and the numbers change to 666. This was one of the coolest subversions of the zombies formula, because at this point we had no clue how this map fit into the rest of the zombies universe, and if it did fit at all, and who was controlling the zombies. It was this mystery that completely changed the zombies formula on its head. The other thing is that there is a little Easter egg with the sniper tower. You can activate it, but you can also then go into afterlife and shock it, and it will start shooting RPG rounds instead of a sniper rifle. It doesn't really do that much damage, like it's not incredibly different from having the regular sniper, but it is a fun little neat thing to know about. Mob of the Dead offers one of the tightest and best refined gameplay experiences, but it isn't without its flaws, and I think probably the biggest hurdle to overcome when making a zombies map based on a real-life location is trying to find the balance between making a well-flowing map that you can kind of make happen if you just generated a map from scratch, and also trying to balance it with, recreating the authenticity of the place that you're developing it from. Voyage of Despair has this problem too. As much as I think it's incredible that they kind of recreated this iconic cruise ship into a zombies map, that does still suffer from map layout problems too, and is way worse than Mob of the Dead in that capacity. When you're trying to recreate a real-life location as a map layout for a zombies map, you're automatically constrained by what is literally there in real life. And I actually visited Alcatraz Island about a year ago, and it was incredible, but I was most shocked at just how accurately they made the layout of the real Alcatraz Island into the zombies map, and also getting not only the layout but the proportions of stuff right. I was genuinely stunned because I knew exactly where I was, I knew precisely where to go and what every single room would be before I even entered it, because they kind of recreated it down to the T. And I think it's a real miracle that they recreated it so accurately, yet it's still a relatively well laid out zombies map. The other thing is that recently we had some leaks come out where it showed some Mob of the Dead pre-alpha footage, and we kind of knew this, from beforehand, that they wanted to do a bit more with Mob of the Dead. They wanted to recreate more of the island, and even in the pre-alpha, the map is a lot bigger. We see some areas that are kind of more akin to what we see in Blood of the Dead, like the new industry section and some outdoor areas, but due to, console constraints, they had to cut it down to what we have now. However, I actually think this was an amazing thing for Mob of the Dead, and I'll talk about why when we get to Blood of the Dead a bit later, but I really think that having those small constraints really made them cut out the fat of this map and everything that didn't necessarily work right, and they kind of were able to condense all of the most fun aspects of this map into a smaller but neater package. Mob of the Dead's map layout isn't perfect either, and sometimes traversing and getting around can be a little bit tedious and clunky. That's why they added the gondola from the docks to the main prison, by the way. Like, that's not there in real life, obviously, but that's there to get back to the main building from the docks, which is one of the most disconnected locations in Mob of the Dead. And ironically, some of the stuff that I dislike most about Blood of the Dead is actually a lot of the new sections they added, and I just kind of have to wonder if these had been added during, Mob's development, if the map would be worse off for it. I'm not really sure. All I can say is that Mob of the Dead offered such a refined and fun and tight experience that we hadn't really had in zombies up to that point, and in some ways quite literally saved Black Ops 2 as a result. Mob of the Dead was a miracle because they were able to recreate this iconic real-life location and somehow make it work for COD Zombies. That is just an impeccable feat of video game development that we don't see very often, and of course, the map would have a main Easter egg in which the ending was not necessarily death. It had two alternate endings in which you could continue the cycle or break it, whether or not the Weasel or the mobsters would win. And this Easter egg, while it is very short, it was stylish, having this kind of like audio style recording where the map goes black and white and they explain the real events of what happened with these mobsters outside of the context of the cycle, and then leading up to the final confrontation on the bridge. This was incredible, and Mob of the Dead became such a unique and flavorful experience that a lot of people became diehard fans of Call of Duty Zombies specifically because of this map, and in no small part is quite literally responsible for saving Black Ops 2 Zombies. It would become the Zombies formula that would be expanded most importantly in Black Ops 3. A lot of the maps like Shadows of Evil, Der Eisendrache, and even I would say Gorod Krovi really take a lot of the design lessons and philosophies from Mob and extrapolate on them, but Mob of the Dead will still hold a very special place in many zombie fans' hearts, and they wanted this to get a remaster. It never got a faithful remaster in Zombies Chronicles, but it would get a remake in Black Ops 4.
Stumbling around in total darkness part of plan.
You give us the fire, we'll give them hell.
Do not speak so lightly of hell.
Easy, Tech. I didn't mean the real thing.
Gentlemen, we are here.
Where have you taken us?
They should be closer to the lab. No matter. This way, if you please. You're late. Doctor? Doctor? Is there a problem? Two for each of them. Survival depends on it. Yeah. You remember? So much to do. The vessel from Axis, the opening of the gateways. Are you sure you're not getting confused? You'll be needing this. The Chronorium. But I've already read it. Read it again. What is the meaning of this? The pages have changed. They... Our blood. Mine blood. You cannot possibly expect me to let this happen. You son of a bitch!
Let me guess. You're not gonna let us in on what that was about.
Or explain why you have people in freezer.
We are leaving.
So, da koniecznie.
Asshole.
There! Get to the portal! Now! Scheiße.
I will be reborn!
My God. What have I done?
Move it, Doc!
I have a very complicated relationship with Blood of the Dead. On one hand, it's legitimately one of my favorite zombies maps of all time, and something that I wish zombies in modern times would emulate. It does so many good things that are charming and unique to this experience that I would like to see iterated on in the future that just sadly haven't been. On the other hand, Blood of the Dead makes a lot of objective mistakes that could be rectified very easily, I think, or somehow tweaked to make the experience that much more enjoyable and memorable. But it's very complicated because Blood of the Dead is only similar to Mob in terms of its actual location. I think they're kind of hard to compare at times because even though I'm going to try to do that in this video, the more I play these maps, the more I feel that they're very different, that are not even really trying to accomplish the same thing. I think that's important because you can look at the Chronicles remasters in Black Ops 3, and yes, while there are some systematic differences and a few actual gameplay differences, for the most part, it seems like those Chronicles remakes, particularly the, Black Ops 1 and World at War maps, are trying to emulate that old experience, but for a slightly updated modern engine. But with Blood of the Dead, I don't really think that was the goal. I don't believe they were trying to recreate the Mob of the Dead experience for a modern, updated engine, and if so, I don't think it really works. But if they weren't, and they were trying to do their own thing, which I suspect that was the case, then I think they succeeded in a lot of ways. There were some hurdles and there are some flaws in this, obviously, but it's really difficult because it really just depends on how you view it. If you're looking at Blood as a Mob remake, I don't think it works. If you're looking at it as its own thing, then the situation gets a bit more nuanced. But why is that exactly? Why does Blood of the Dead fail as a Mob remake? Well, first and foremost, we should talk about how the map is set up. First off, we are not playing as that iconic celebrity cast that was first and only featured in Mob of the Dead. They do appear in the map, kind of, like they are spirits later in the Easter egg, but they don't have voice lines and we're not playing as that crew. Instead, we play as Primus and we're continuing the Ether story as it's starting to reach its conclusion in Black Ops 4. And this is important because that does to some degree set the tone for the map, and also one of the biggest gameplay differences is that afterlife and that entire mechanic is not present in Blood of the Dead. I established earlier in the video how fundamental and integral the afterlife mechanic is to how Mob of the Dead works, even from a map layout perspective. So to not have that mechanic means that Blood of the Dead is automatically going to have to be retooled tremendously to some degree. They do have a replacement for afterlife, kind of, but it's not really the same, and it's one of my least favorite elements of the map, but we'll get to that. The thing with Blood of the Dead is that it does actually feature a lot of the expanded elements that Mob of the Dead initially was going to have, the new industry section. But not only that, another smaller new section would be added, the Wardens area, and this is past the Speed Cola machine in the original Mob of the Dead, and this area, you could see it, but it was unplayable space. But they made this able to be interacted with, and there's actually stuff here in Blood of the Dead. So between this section and the new industries area, there is a lot of new map to uncover, and while I think these sections are pretty great on their own, I do think they have a hard time melding well with the already established map layout and flow of the original Mob of the Dead, and I'll explain why I think these areas are a bit clunky when you consider the overall grand scheme of things. But it's like they took the new industry section and tried to like Frankenstein it onto an original map layout they had already made, and it kind of works but also kind of doesn't. Now, I realize this area isn't entirely Frankensteined onto the prison because this section kind of exists in real life. I get all that, but what I'm saying is it kind of made them retool how the map works. What I thought was so great about the prison sequence is not really here now. Like, you spawn in the new industry section, and again, turning on the power in Mob was about going into Afterlife and activating different sections in unique and creative ways. In this map, you just flip a power switch. There's also a dog location here where you can start getting the tomahawk, and then you do have this very interesting bridge section where when you talk about deliberate design and like how you want the player to go about progressing and interacting with it, it's very clear that this bridge section is meant to kind of demand that you use your new specialist weapon. This was one of the core features of Black Ops 4. You have these specialists that you can pull out after charging them, and it's very obvious that this bridge is meant for you to take advantage of these and kind of learn how to use them. And I'm going to be honest, I really like this. it might be my favorite part about the new industry section. While I think the rest of it is kind of just tacked on for the sake of the Easter egg and maybe just doing it because they can, I really like this bridge, and the initial setup of this is awesome. This leads you to this kind of middle section between the bridge and the prison itself, where you first encounter the warden, and you have to push through more zombies before you get into the prison itself. Now, you kind of approach the entire area sideways, right? Where you spawn in this area in Mob of the Dead and kind of work your way out and up. In Blood of the Dead, you kind of work your way in the side and through the prison. It's very different. Here's where one of the biggest differences between these two maps can be seen. In Mob of the Dead, getting Pack-a-Punch means getting all of the plane parts, which is essentially doing all of the steps of the Easter egg to some degree. Like, all of the mechanics that they developed and designed, you have to interact with those to get Pack-a-Punch. That's kind of a process. It takes you to the Golden Gate Bridge. It's this big moment. However, in Blood of the Dead, getting Pack-a-Punch is only a very small part of this map, and you don't have that big experience to acquire it. All you really need to do is enter the prison, kill the warden, grab this blue thing off one of the afterlife boxes, get a shield piece, and then turn on the power, which again, for some reason, has like 3 switches that randomize every game for no reason at all. And then once you do that, you simply go to the rooftop, and then you can collect souls in the shield that you built and shock the thing, and then these ghosts bring it in. This doesn't require a ton of work, and you can get it exceptionally early, and that is, like, obviously kind of my point, is that Blood of the Dead's design, what they really wanted you to do is do the map's main quest, which a lot of the substance is to be found. But in Mob of the Dead, a lot of the substance was actually opening up the prison, getting these plane parts, and getting to Pack-a-Punch. That was the point, that was the moment. But in Blood of the Dead, you get by that really quickly, and Pack-a-Punch kind of just happens, and that's kind of like just step one of the much bigger Easter egg in front of you. And this is where I think some of the divide on these maps comes into play, because if you're a player who's a bit more casual and you just like to get on and kill zombies, maybe unlock Pack-a-Punch and just upgrade a few guns and survive as long as you can, you'll probably greatly prefer the experience of Mob of the Dead, because that map offers a lot more in the way of getting to that moment, and there's a lot more substance involved of getting to the Golden Gate Bridge and getting access to Pack-a-Punch, where in Blood of the Dead, it's simply a minor step into getting to the main Easter egg, which, you know, if you're an Easter egg guy, you're probably gonna like Blood of the Dead more, because it has much more substance to offer in that regard. Before I can take apart the beautiful disaster that is the Blood of the Dead main Easter egg, I do want to quickly discuss a couple of the minor changes between these maps and a couple of mechanics in their replacement. So, for example, instead of Afterlife, we now have this ability to use this zombie shield. The zombie shield in Black Ops 4 was pretty much a must-have for every single map. It was tied to a lot of the mechanics of even just how player health works and some of the perks. So the shields are very important, and they made it an actual integral piece to this map's design. The shield is kind of a replacement for Afterlife, right? Like, you shock a lot of the same boxes and interact with the same doors to make things happen, but the shield works very different to Afterlife. Instead of going invulnerable and being able to fly around and do things at will, you essentially need to suck the soul from a zombie using a key, and then using 3 zombie souls will grant you 1 shield blast. Now, traditionally, the zombie shield can only hold 2 blasts, but if you upgrade it, it can hold 4, and you absolutely need to upgrade it if you're going to be doing this in any capacity solo, at least. Also, not to mention, they would slightly adjust how you acquire the Hell's Retriever, most specifically where the doghead locations are. There's now no longer one in the docks or in the infirmary. They moved one to one of the locations in the new industry, and also one out in Eagle Plaza near the warden's house. This is fine because it does still require you to explore the map a little bit, and it is encouraging you to find these new locations. Whereas if you just played Mob of the Dead, your first instinct would be to assume that all of the dogheads are just going to be in the same spots as they were in Mob, and you might end up missing some of the new locations that it has to offer. So I do think this was a smart choice. They also would innovate a little bit on the Blundergat. The normal Blundergat is still in the game, and even the Acid Gat kit is still here too, albeit it's a lot easier to build, but they also introduced a brand new variant called the Magma Gat, and it is absolutely incredible. I have nothing but good things to say about this weapon. I love the upgrade process, and I love how it behaves in the game too. Now, I'll come back to the Magma Gat and other weapons weapons and side Easter eggs that can be acquired in Blood a bit later, but I want to talk about probably Blood of the Dead's biggest mistake and one of its just objective design flaws, and this is the Pack-a-Punch system. So in Mob of the Dead, of course, the big moment is you build a plane, you fly to the Golden Gate Bridge, and get the ability to upgrade your weapons. In Blood of the Dead, I established it's a lot easier to get Pack-a-Punch. You just need to build the shield and then shock this thing once, and then these ghosts will bring it to you, and that's great. But the thing with the Pack-a-Punch machine is that it doesn't stay here on the rooftop. I think it would be okay if it did, but they made a moving Pack-a-Punch system, which I can understand why, because, you know, Mob of the Dead and Blood, for that matter, is bigger, and it doesn't have the greatest map layout, so they want the machine to be teleporting around, so maybe if you're far away from it, you can still upgrade. In theory, this is a good idea, but the Pack-a-Punch machine is one of the worst flaws in this map, and that's because it doesn't tell you when it's going to move, it just does it every couple of rounds, and it also never tells you where it's located. We've actually seen teleporting Pack-a-Punch on a more recent Zombies map, The Tomb, and while it only has 2 locations that are really easy to get to, it actually has a map that shows you where the Pack-a-Punch machine is if it's not at that current location. And you know how, like, you know, in Zombies in every map ever, the mystery box has a light that shines in the sky to kind of locate where the box can be found? You would think that there would be some kind of thing for the Pack-a-Punch machine, but there literally isn't. There's not even like a lightning strike, there's not any kind of glowing red light or any indicator of where the Pack-a-Punch machine is to be found. It's a complete shot in the dark, and to make matters worse, all of the locations are pretty far away from each other. At least in the Tomb, if it's not here in the Nexus, you can just run through the blue teleporter and you'll get there in like 15 seconds. In Blood of the Dead, if you go to the rooftop and guess wrong, you then have to run all the way down to the docks, which is a couple minutes pretty much, and then if it's not there, you have to go all the way back to the New Industries section, which the docks and New Industries are the most disconnected areas of the map, and they take a long time to get to, so if you guess wrong, you're going to be running around a hell of a lot in this map. It's just, look, there's a lot of things in Zombies that I might just not personally like and you do, and a lot of this is just opinions, right? And a lot of the Zombies discussion about any map really is a lot of personal preference at the end of the day. Some people like maps for other reasons that other people might hate them, but in this case specifically, I think it's just an objectively bad choice to not tell the player where the Pack-a-Punch machine is at any given point, especially considering how clunky the map layout is and how far away they are. This is one of the most frustrating elements to this game that could be alleviated with something as simple as like a lightning strike. I mean, hell, even on older zombie maps, they would tell you where the Wonder Fizz machine is from a lightning strike. We need something similar here, or at least this ghostly aura coming up from the sky or something like that, but there's nothing, and this is one of the worst aspects of Blood of the Dead that I believe is just indefensible. I'm also not really a big fan of this shield blast system either in Blood of the Dead. I think between that and the Pack-a-Punch machine are some of my biggest annoyances, but the problem with the shield blast system is a couple of things. Number one is that I think that one of the most fun ways to play Call of Duty Zombies is having your gun out and using your weapon to kill zombies most of the time. But in Blood of the Dead, and especially if you're doing the main Easter egg, you're going to be having your zombie shield out about 80% of the time, and most of that is just standing there using the key to suck zombie souls, which once again, if you just kind of break it down mathematically, if you've upgraded your shield and you want 4 shield blasts, you're going to need to suck up 3 zombies per shield blast, which means to get a full charge, you're going to need at least 12 zombies, and they take about 5 or 6 seconds apiece per zombie for every given soul, and then you consider how many shield blast charges you actually need overall to do the entire Blood of the Dead Easter egg. That's a lot of seconds just sitting there with your key out, kind of doing nothing. And, you know, I understand there's this shock charge box that you can find to, you know, immediately get a full charge, and that is nice every once in a while, but the thing is, it can be spread anywhere in the map. That includes New Industries, that includes the prison. I've already laid out how long it takes to get around this map because there's really no fast way to get from the docks to the New Industries at all. It's going to be kind of a journey no matter what, and with how spread out this power box can be, and there's only one spot at any given time, it's not really a reliable way to be charging your shield. More often than not, you're going to be using zombie souls to do just that, but the time really adds up, and it goes to show that, you know, some of the most optimized maps in Zombies history can be speedran under 20 minutes, whereas Blood of the Dead, like the fastest time imaginable right now is like 45 minutes max. And to make matters worse, not only are you going to be standing there with your shield out a long time trying to charge all of these, but if your shield breaks while you have charges, then you lose all of those. If you go and buy a new shield, all of those charges that you gathered are going to be gone, and you got to do the process all over again. And with how aggressive these zombies in Black Ops 4 really are, this can be an absolute nightmare. I just think this is one of the worst mechanics that exist in this map, and is probably the primary reason I have a lot of issues with enjoying this one. And it sucks because the shield is so integral to the main Easter egg, which I actually kind of like. The thing is, Blood of the Dead is the main Easter egg is a mixed bag of some of my favorite zombie moments and my least favorite zombie moments ever. So you really have to take the good with the bad with this one. But let's talk a little bit about the main Easter egg. It does involve both the brand new industry section and the Eagle Plaza or the Warden's house. In fact, that's actually where you begin the main quest. You need the Warden to hit a monkey bomb upstairs in this office to unlock this secret layer. This reveal is so cool. This moment is so awesome. I love it, and it sets the tone for the map and really tees you off for the rest of the Easter egg. It's just incredible. However, it's not this like cinematic that I have a problem with. It's actually the design of the Warden's room itself. The thing you'll notice is that this room is quite small, and that would be fine if they paid attention to the fact that, okay, you can do this Easter egg co-op, obviously, you know, with a bunch of players, but you also can do it solo, and that's fine. But traditionally in zombies, they make proportions to where at least 1 or 2 player models can fit through a space at any given time. In fact, a weird little detail is that the real Alcatraz stairs that go up to kind of the Juggernog area, or where the gondola is, they're a little bit skinnier in real life than they are in the game. That's because they made them slightly wider so that, you know, a player model and a zombie could both fit through at the same time. For some reason, in this map, they made the Warden's entrance only big enough for 1 player model at a time strictly. You can't pass by a zombie in this one, and there's no alternative way out. You can't actually like drop out the front door or anything. You have to go through this small little area, which means if you go and get a code, you pretty much have to use your specialist or risk breaking your shield to even get out of the room. I don't get why they made this so damn small. I can't tell you how many times I've had a fully charged shield break in this room because I maybe didn't have a specialist charged, and you can't squeeze past the zombies in any direct way. Even if you're using the magma gat, it does kill them, but it guides them to a different spot, but you still can't squeeze past them out of this door. And again, there's no other way out. It's one of the worst areas in this game because of how frequently you have to be coming and going. To even get up to this point where you have the Chronorium and you can start doing these challenges, you first have to do a step where you locate a bird a couple of different times, and this is the iconic 42 bird location step in Blood of the Dead. There are a ton of locations for where this bird can go, and again, this is one of those things where it's like, you could say the map is misunderstood because there technically is a way to see kind of where the bird goes. If you look out at the docks, there's this small little dash that will kind of go in a specific direction where you can kind of locate the bird, but you're supposed to listen for it and then shield blast it a couple of different times until you end up getting the Chronorium. This is one of those things where it's like, yes, the step does have a way to kind of solve it a bit easier, but I still don't think that necessarily makes it a good step. Now, I'll agree, it is ridiculous how many different locations there are for this bird, but the more I play it, the more I don't think it's necessarily the worst thing, because again, you can use this dash to kind of like see where the general location of it is going to be, but even if you don't, it's pretty easy to find once you're just, you know, listening through your shield. You'll get an audio cue to kind of show you where it's at. It's not too bad. It's just not a very fun step though. That's the thing, is Blood of the Dead has a lot of steps that aren't bad, but they're also not very fun. Look, I'm also all for having amazing and complicated Easter egg steps, but I also still want them to be fun to do at the end of the day. I don't really want to do homework in my zombies map that feels like a chore, and Blood of the Dead definitely teeters on the chore-like side at some points. There are also times where I think the steps are just incredibly engaging and enjoyable. Once you've unlocked Pack-a-Punch, gotten the Chronorium from the bird, you can now start to do these challenges, and let's break some of them down individually. You can get these challenges in any order in this map, which I guess is where some of the replayability comes from. But after activating a challenge, you'll see a portal which requires a shield blast to activate, and one of these challenges can actually be a Simon Says step, where you need to go to the original power station and you need to do 5 rounds of Simon Says, these different generators around the room that at the end will flash 3 different papers, and you need those to basically translate a code from a punch card into these computers, which will give you the right symbols to shock this ghost to pull the particular levers. This is probably one of the more like intellectually heavy steps I would say that this map has to offer, and it can take quite a while just because of the nature of this process, but I don't really dislike the step at all. I don't have a problem with this one. It can be a little on the longer side, but I think it's okay for the most part. Another challenge can be one that I actually really enjoy, which is essentially escorting a soul from the upper infirmary all the way down to the docks. This one, he essentially uses the zombies that you kill as fuel, and you need to guide him all the way down to his portal so that he can escape. Now, I love this part. This step is awesome. However, I should mention the prerequisite to get this soul to spawn is probably the worst step in this whole Easter egg, which is the Morse code. Now, I dislike this for a couple of reasons, and yes, I know there is a guaranteed way to kind of get the Morse code sequence that you need. You can like look through your shield, or I don't think you even have to use the shield, but you can look out past the docks and you see like this buoy flashing the Morse code that you have. And while that is nice, I actually think that even though this does have a solve, in practice, it's actually not that much faster than just doing trial and error, to be honest, especially co-op. The thing is though, there's no reliable way to do this in solo because this room is so tiny, and with how aggressive the spawn system in Black Ops 4 is, you don't have the time to sit down and really punch in these codes, or at least work on them, unless a zombie is going to be constantly harassing you and ending the rounds, which risks breaking your shield, which means risks having to charge it all over again. This is probably my least favorite aspect of this map, and I've never grown to like this step. Even though there is technically a solve for it, I don't think that makes it a fun or engaging or good step. I'll never be convinced that the Blood of the Dead Morse code step is good, and that's fine, because there's other steps that I really do like. One of my favorites is actually the challenge down in the showers, where this ghost is going to give you a banjo, and then you need to get as many kills as you can while staying in this safe zone and collecting zombie souls. This one's a lot of fun. It's always challenging, and it's heart-pounding, and it's just a really good step overall. Another one that I really enjoy that might be my favorite is the escort from the cafeteria to the central warden's office inside of the prison. You have to take this route where all of these spirits are cheering you on, and zombies are flooding in to take down this spirit, and you need to protect him from his health depleting, and eventually a warden's going to spawn in. It's a really engaging and exciting sequence as well that isn't annoying, and it's always a pleasure to complete. And the other one that is probably the most controversial, and I think your perception of this one really depends on personal experience, and I think it varies greatly whether you're playing solo or co-op. This ghost spawns in and grabs a spoon and tries to kill another prisoner on the other side near this fan trap in the new industry section, but your job is to shield blast him where he becomes vulnerable for a little bit, and use the shield key and basically like disintegrate his soul for as long as you can until he turns red, and then he becomes vulnerable so that you can run the trap and get the orb from him. This step is alright. It just, I think the problem is the sheer amount of shield blasts that it requires. To even set up the challenge initially, you need 2 shield blasts basically to activate the portal and also spawn it in. You need another one to kind of start the challenge, and then you need like 4 more to really complete this step. So this one can be a bit of a chore in solo, but I think it plays much better in co-op. Overall, the challenges that is the main substance of the Easter egg are definitely a big mixed bag, but you get some of the best payoff at the end of it. You get some great mid-game cutscenes with the warden. You have this amazing sequence pre-boss fight. Like, a lot of this is my favorite stuff in the map, and the boss fight itself is honestly not crazy, but it's pretty good. It's not the hardest boss we've ever gotten, but it's exciting and it is challenging, and it has some of the most emotional resonance we've ever seen in zombies. Probably the most emotional map there is, and a lot of this is just the build-up leading up to this moment. It's great. It's executed beautifully. You do have to go through a lot of tedious processes and chores to get to this moment, but damn it if it's not worth it. The finale is perhaps the most memorable moment, to me at least, in all of Call of Duty Zombies, and for that it certainly deserves some credit. While I do think the gameplay is significantly flawed getting there, and it's certainly not perfect, I do think it is overall worth it. I want to quickly touch on side Easter eggs just a bit, because this has some of the most baffling ones we've ever seen in the entire franchise of Call of Duty, period. Like, while many of the side quests in Blood of the Dead are actually really good, you know, the Magmagat or even the Hell's Redeemer are awesome, the most infamous one in this map is the Golden Spork Knife. Essentially, this is taking the Golden Spork to its logical conclusion and pretty much making an instant one-hit melee on almost any round around, and even being able to one-hit wardens. But in order to get this, you have to do a process that's more tedious and time-consuming than the main Easter egg itself, and it wasn't even really discovered by the community. There would be a QA tester who would leak these steps, because most likely this wouldn't be discovered from the zombies community naturally for a very long time. And spoilers, the reward is simply not worth it. To get this golden spork knife, you first need to get the spoon, which then requires you to get the golden spork, which then requires you to get the golden scalpel, which then requires you to do some of the most tedious steps ever in zombies. You need to collect these 3 different very hidden gems around the map, get 100 kills at each respective trap. There's 3 different ones of them, and then after picking up those gems, you submerge it in the blood. You got to collect the golden nugget shortly after using the melee attack, which is also part of the thing. And look, I'm not going to bore you with the process, but the reward is not worth it. While on one hand, I really do like the idea of having something so hidden that it's probably going to take the zombies community years to ever discover, and you do get a tangible reward out of it. The thing is, the reward is just simply not worth the time and effort that is required to get this thing. And also, not to mention, a lot of times knowing side Easter eggs kind of, leads into doing the main quest, right? Like on Garad or on Dreisendrach, you can do some side Easter eggs that kind of assist you up to that last moment. You can get the plunger in Dreisendrach, which is going to make the boss fight a hell of a lot easier. You can upgrade the little mini dragon in Garad and lead that into the boss fight. What I'm getting at is that in zombies, you can do a lot of side quests that will bolster your experience for the finale and for the boss fight. But in Blood of the Dead, you have to make a choice of whether you're going to do the main Easter egg or you're going to get the golden spork knife. You pretty much can't do both, because you will have burned through so many rounds doing one or the other that the other option is just not really available or possible anymore. I mean, I'm sure you could, but it's not really realistic for most people. Doing the golden spork knife in general is not realistic for most people. It's just simply too much work. Blood of the Dead had tough shoes to fill, and in some ways, I don't blame Treyarch and specifically Jason Blundell for making the decisions they made with this map. I do think a lot of them are flawed, and I will never necessarily be on board with all of the choices that this game or this map specifically made, but it does have a lot of memorable things to offer. Like I said, it's the most emotional map we have in COD Zombies, and probably one of the most memorable for that. But just how I said that I think a lot of the changes that Classified made in Black Ops 4 compared to the original experience in Black Ops 1 really reduced a lot of its original charm, I think that is the case here too, because it plays almost nothing like Mob of the Dead despite it being in the exact same location. Now, does it do enough on its own to become its own justifiable zombies map that stands on its own feet? I think it does. Like, again, I don't love every aspect about it, but it does enough on its own that's brand new that I can respect it for being unique. When you compare it to Mob of the Dead and you look at, oh, does this hold up as a Mob of the Dead remake? I think I've made the case that I don't believe it does, and more so though, I don't think it's really trying to. It does pay homage to a lot of Mob of the Dead, and it does take place in the same prison, but I don't think it's trying to recreate that experience whatsoever. Would I have liked to see a Chronicles version of Mob of the Dead that's a more faithful remake for the BO3 systems? Honestly, maybe. It's an interesting thought experiment. I just think that we could have had that experience, and we could have had something like Blood of the Dead without it having to literally take place in Alcatraz, if that makes sense. I still think we could have had the same kind of design, the same emotional resonance that Blood of the Dead is so known for, but it didn't need to necessarily take place in this prison, and we didn't need to be in this setting for that to happen, if that makes sense. It's only a remake in the sense that it takes place at Alcatraz. That's pretty much where the similarities stop, and maybe there are wonder weapons and a couple of Easter eggs, but that's pretty much it. At the end of the day, to me, Mob of the Dead is a tighter experience but more refined and maybe a bit smaller scale, whereas Blood of the Dead is definitely bigger, but it might be a little more bloated and certainly makes a lot more mistakes. And for some people, that's enough because it has more content to offer. For some people, they prefer the smaller but more refined experience. I think it really depends for me what I'm in the mood for because they offer something so incredibly different. I imagine Mob of the Dead is more palatable for most people and for the average Zombies player there where it's like you really gotta be in a mood to want to play Blood of the Dead. It's something that you kind of gotta like mentally prepare yourself for. And sometimes, to be totally honest, I'm just not in the mood to play a map like this. It's a certain flavor that every once in a while I find myself wanting to go for, but most of the time, given a choice, I would probably pick Mob of the Dead and its refined experience over something like Blood almost any day of the week. But anyways, I hope you guys enjoyed. Subscribe if you're new to the channel, and if you want to see more videos or even some more map comparisons, let me know what you would like me to take a look at next, and I will see you guys in the next one. Peace.